Hello and welcome. I'm Disha Bagchi and you're watching India Global. Today's big story: for UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, stop the boats and reducing net migration figures was his ticket to 10 Downing Street in 2022. Yet, it seems now foreign students are caught in the crossfire of the UK government's crackdown on migration. Earlier this week, the UK government's Migration Advisory Committee reviewed the graduate visa entitlement, which allows international students to work in the country for over 2 to 3 years after they graduate, and recommended that this visa should remain in place. However, it remains unclear what's next for this crucial visa entitlement. It's important to note that Indians are among the largest applicants of this visa program, contributing to over 40% of applicants. This review also comes at a time when the Rishi Sunak government introduced new immigration rules earlier this year, including restrictions on bringing dependents, increasing salary thresholds for visas, and more. To discuss what this means for Indian students in the UK and more, we have with us Sanam Arora, Chairperson, National Indian Students and Alumni Union; David Pillsbury, Chief Development Officer, Oxford International Education Group; and Radhika Iyer, joining us from London. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us for this discussion. So my first question is to you, Sanam. So despite the UK Migration Advisory Committee's recommendation to retain the graduate visa route, you say that the battle is far from over. Why do you say so?
Over. The war may have been won, and I say that because this is a non-binding recommendation from the Migration Advisory Committee. And we've had an instance in the past, actually, the last time the post-study work visa was introduced in the UK, the MAC was actually against its introduction, yet the government went ahead and did it anyway. So what we are very concerned about, and what indeed the whole of the higher education sector is very concerned about, is that something similar may happen, only that this time it will be to take away the graduate route in the first place. So that is where the big question is what's going to happen in the next week.
Right. And do you think that if the graduate visa were to be altered or halted altogether, what sort of challenges could international students face?
Well, I think international students, when we've spoken to Indian students, when we've spoken to the bulk of international students, employability and the ability to get meaningful work experience is the number one concern they have, other than the academic prowess of the institution that they are considering studying at. Indeed, for 70% of Indian students, this is the top priority. And so if the UK doesn't then offer a compelling enough proposition for Indian students or for the wider international student community, I'm afraid that students will, A, be quite dejected because this is such a strong ask of them and they really want to come to the UK because these are world-class universities. But I'm afraid that they will just not come in the same numbers. Last time the post-study work visa got taken away, we had about a 65-70% fall in the numbers coming from India. And I'm afraid a similar or even worse position may be the case this time because now students have other international destinations that are also opening up to them. So I think for international students, it will be quite disappointing, quite damaging. And for the sector, it would be catastrophic economically.
Right. Thank you so much. So now moving on to David. The MAC report stated that universities would suffer if students were to, reduce their numbers to coming towards the UK and if the visa route is not retained. So we're also seeing that many universities are already seeing drop in foreign applicants. So where do universities stand in this conversation?
So it is very challenging for UK universities, and it was reassuring to see that the MAC, although it was given a very narrow terms of reference by the government, actually focused on the economic impact of overseas students. And I think the reason why the MAC is so important and why I remain confident that the Prime Minister will make the right decision is that they did collate, even in that short period, an incredible amount of evidence about the success of the graduate route, how we compare in our post-study work offer with other countries. I think the game is far from over. I remain very confident because, as Sanam mentioned, overseas students are so essential, not just in terms of the financial contribution they bring, but the social and cultural benefits that they bring. I don't think this government is stupid enough to make such a poor decision What we're talking about is the voices of a few individuals on the right of the Conservative Party. I don't think that will be enough to sway political opinion when faced with the evidence.
So do you think universities could also face financial challenges if foreign students do not opt to study in the UK? Do you think domestic students could then see an increase in education costs in the UK?
So one of the problems for the UK is that the government funding for universities has been capped. They have set that fee at $9,250, and it's been very sensible and I think a great success on the part of universities that they've looked at international students. That fundamental problem of the funding of universities will be addressed. There are no easy answers, but we all understand that the UK wants to be a knowledge superpower. Rishi Sunak himself has talked about being a research powerhouse. The UK cannot allow itself to have its universities undermined. That's why I remain confident that common sense will prevail.
Right. Now, my next question is to you, Radhika. You know, migration has remained a top issue for voters in the UK ahead of the elections in the country. So do you think Prime Minister Sunak is facing pressure from the Conservative right to axe the graduate route visa?
Rishi Sunak is under pressure in many ways, not just this one. He's Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party at a time that the Conservatives are facing a rout. We saw the mayoral election where the Labour Party kept London City. We saw the recent by-election where the Tories had lost their seats and the Labour made gains. And we know that this is election year for the UK. We also know that Rishi Sunak is heading the Tory party, which is seeking a fourth consecutive term. Not easy at all considering the anti-incumbency, the multiple scandals that the Tory party has faced in the last few years during COVID, the mismanagement of COVID, with erstwhile Prime Minister Boris Johnson still facing investigation for multiple scandals. So given all of this, Rishi Sunak is at a time facing a political challenge and at the same time also trying perhaps to come across as someone who makes bold decisions. He did announce before this particular announcement and the tweet we saw, the controversial tweet we saw a couple of days ago, that there were going to be bold decisions. From the fellow panelists, I gather that there is a sense that common sense must prevail because if this particular rule would have to come into play, then not just financially would Britain lose towards letting go of international students, but alongside there's going to be a huge dent in the pool of talent that Britain attracts from across the world, especially from countries such as India, which has a huge uptake of UK education, higher education in the UK. And students from India, although it has been so hostile, although it has been so difficult for students to live their life in the UK, despite the cost of living crisis, despite the several economic challenges in the UK, continue to see the UK as a very important destination because of the quality of education that there is here, because of the quality of questions that they are able to ask, and the fact that this country still allows for free democracy where students are able to express their views irrespective of where they come from and what their course is. So considering all of these benefits that students get, considering the benefits that students give, international students give to Britain, it will be very interesting to see whether the government, whether Rishi Sunak, although many of his colleagues in the Tory party are still divided over this view, although the Migration Advisory Committee has been against this view and has not expressed full evidence of the findings that Rishi claims that there are, it will be interesting to see whether they will still go ahead and do this. As Sanam pointed out, the Migration Advisory Committee is only an advisory committee and is not such a decision, is not bound, the government is not bound to make decisions basis their recommendation. And we have seen in the past that they have gone against the MAC, reversed decisions within months, and it will be interesting to see whether some of that chaos is still to come in Britain.
Well, thanks, Radhika. My next question is both to Sanam and David. We've seen that the Sunak government did introduce new restrictions to visas, with students not being allowed to bring in dependents to the UK. And they are, in a sense, proud of this new rule that they've taken. So do you expect a downward trend in students coming to the UK, and how do you think this would overall impact the UK economy? Because international students do contribute to a large amount to the UK economy, almost 40 billion pounds. So we can go to Sanam first. Yeah.
Sure. Look, the changes that happened with dependents and also on the salary thresholds for skilled worker visas, there's enough evidence already out there to tell us that there's been a 40% fall of the numbers of students that are coming over already as a result. In fact, I spoke to Professor Brian Bell just yesterday, who has chaired the Migration Advisory Committee, and he told us that he thinks that the numbers that the Conservative government was expecting to fall as a result of these particular changes, even more than what the Conservative government was expecting, has already probably happened. And so to a certain degree, the question is more even required to bring down those numbers of net migration that the government is after? That impact may have already happened more than the government originally forecasted, which I think the Prime Minister has also kind of alluded to in his tweet about yesterday that he made. So I think, we have already seen enough data to say 40% fall has already happened. And that's just on the basis of these changes and pure speculation on what might happen with the post-study work visa. So if the graduate route post-study work visa goes away, I'm afraid we're looking at another 25-30% drop minimum, maybe even more. There are some universities which are particularly sensitive to it, where I would expect the drop to be as high as 70-80% as well. And there is no doubt in my mind, having spoken to so many different academics, so many different vice chancellors, people like David before, that we are heading for economic disaster for many universities if the graduate route gets taken away. Whether they'll be able to weather the storm, whether a future government may reverse this change for that interim period of time. Will bank governance kick in, for example? Will universities start to get into debt if it carries on too long? Those are the things that leaders in universities are worried about right now. But there is absolutely no doubt that higher education exports, which is a third or fourth largest export for this country, is one of the few economic bright spots we have. So as a British taxpayer, I'm feeling like this makes absolutely no logical sense to hurt what is a shining export for our country that we should be really proud of and we should be championing and cheerleading, as opposed to being on the defensive, which universities tell us they feel like they're on the time.
Right. And going to you, David, now.
Yeah, so the government is obsessed with net migration, and sadly the university sector is obsessed with taking students out of the net migration numbers. It's a United Nations definition. What we should all agree on is that what we need to focus on is how many people are truly migrants. And the answer is very, very few students ever secure settled status. The problem was that the rate of growth of overseas students after COVID, because the UK remained one of the few destinations open, was really quite significant. And that rise, compounded by the fact that the government itself included dependents when it reintroduced the graduate route, really spooked the government. As Sanam said, now that we've seen the fall, we will automatically see a fall in the net migration numbers. I mean, that's how it works. When numbers are going up, net migration goes up. When student numbers come down, net migration mechanically comes down. Brian Bell, the chair of the Migration Advisory Committee, pointed out that himself. So that's one of the reasons I feel confident that the government will not do anything really stupid, because what it wanted to achieve has already been achieved. And what it absolutely doesn't want, as Sanam said, is a further decline in overseas students. Now, we can argue about how much it will decline. That there are problems with Australia and Canada. The UK still remains an incredibly attractive destination for so many reasons and is so welcoming of Indian students, so tolerant. We have, and the employability options here, I think, are better than any other of the major English-speaking destinations. So when you pull all that together, I do believe that the Prime Minister will come to the right decision, because it is a small number of very vocal voices. I mean, we hear a lot of noise, but it's coming from a very small group of people. And I don't think they will ultimately influence such an important policy.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Sanam, David and Radhika for joining us for this discussion.